Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis Vlog. This is a video about trauma, more specifically, what most people get wrong. I mean, dead wrong, just flat out wrong about trauma. Now, trauma is one of those words that gets thrown around all the time these days. You know, it seems as if mostly everyone claims to be traumatized, and if you listen to some people, you know, everyone has trauma and everyone is traumatized. I don't think this is the case at all. I think, and in my experience when working with people who claim to be traumatized, when we really dig down into it, what's really going on is a perception of inescapability. That the person feels trapped somehow in something. It's that very perception of inescapability that fuels someone being lost in this constant on alarm alert fight or flight response, right? So whenever they hear something, see something, something might remind them of a particular event, and it feels as if it's happening again, and they feel completely stuck in it, and they have no way out, seemingly. That's what most people seem to refer to if you drill down a little bit on what they mean by being traumatized. So if you get that, you see that people can experience things that most of us would consider to be horrible or deeply unjust or deeply unfair, but they're not necessarily traumatized by it because they don't have that perception of inescapability. Whereas other people might have experienced something that most might think not that big a deal, but or they might even seen someone else be subjected to something, and they have a traumatic response around it because they're stuck in this perception of inescapability. Now, one question I ask people who claim to be traumatized that I've never heard another therapist ask is, how long have you been traumatized? Meaning, how long has this been an issue for you? Because if you ask that question, you will very often discover that someone may say that, look, this happened to me in 1985 and it was deeply traumatic, or this happened to me in 2016 and it was deeply traumatic. Let's say you see them in 2022, right, as a client, and you ask them, well, how long has this been traumatic for you? They might say, well, you know, I really didn't think about it for a decade. Or it's really, I haven't really given it that much thought in the last 5 years. But in the last year or so, or in the last few months, it's really bugged me, and I'm obsessing about it, and I'm ruminating about it, and I'm stuck in it, and I'm angry, and I'm irritable, and I feel shame, and so on and so forth. So even if they claim to be traumatized about something that happened 20 years ago, it might not have been an issue for 10 years or 15 years. So that question, how long have you had this internal response of being traumatized, of feeling trapped or living in fight or flight with regards to this? It's very often not the entire time. Someone might even say, look, it was really stressful for a month or so after the event, and then it kind of faded, and for the next year and a half I didn't really think about it, but then it started to become a big issue again. So if if someone can be helped to see that, they begin to see that, wait a minute, it's not the event or the life circumstance in and of itself, but it's the perception of what it means about me, what it means about life, what it means about other people, or right or wrong. So as our perceptions change, as our identity changes, as our self concept changes, those new perceptions may turn something into a problem that previously wasn't. Or that new perception, or that, call it, upgrade in how we think of ourselves, might, given our new identity or our new whatever ideology we may have internalized, now it might suddenly look like a trauma. So let me give you some concrete examples from my practice about this. So one thing I've written about and mentioned previously are people who have been subject to sexual abuse as kids. Now, quite a few people who have experienced that are not at all traumatized. Like, they'll still go, what that person did was completely fucked up, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't really impact their lives. It's not a, it doesn't really constitute how they view themselves. And then, of course, you have some people who, they've been deeply troubled by that, ever since it happened. But what I've had clients tell me on numerous occasions is, so let's say you have a client who has a family member who does things to them that he or she shouldn't, might not be outright rape or the worst, but things that the person definitely shouldn't have done, and it's wrong. But the kid at the time might not necessarily have a reference for anything else. They might be confused, they might be bewildered, but they may not at all be traumatized. And they may not hate their father or their uncle or whoever this person might be. They might still love this person. And then they become teenagers and they start having different types of conversations with friends and other people, and they start reading, and they make these horrible discoveries that A, they've been sexually abused, and B, they're not traumatized. So the fact that they're not traumatized becomes their trauma. Because the only narrative, the only story that's available are people who are devastated, who hate the perpetrator, who can't be intimate, who can't trust anyone, who for them this event defines them. That's all they read. So they think that's normal, in quotation marks. And then they check internally, and they don't at all have that hatred or that experience. And they then conclude that, oh shit, I'm a pervert, something's wrong with me, I'm deeply deficient as a result of not having those responses. And then they get completely absorbed into that and trapped in it. That becomes the trauma. So this is one example of something that wasn't necessarily traumatic for many years, suddenly becoming so as a result of them having a different perception suddenly. So this idea that helping people revolves around digging into their past and doing this archaeological dig to find out what really happens, no, help the person relate differently to their thoughts and feelings right now. That's how you help people, because that's all you ever really dealing with. What does this mean to the person? What's the story? What's the identification? How are they relating to their thoughts and feelings in this very moment? And what boundaries do they have? What actions are they taking on their own behalf? These are important questions. I'll give you a couple of other examples. So, I have had people who, when they tell me about their traumatic childhoods, and I ask them, what happened back then, it sounds pretty shitty and pretty traumatic. But for some of these people, when I ask them, how long has it been traumatic for you? A person might say, well, in the last couple of years. Well, what happened in the last couple of years? Well, I've been profoundly happy. I met my husband, or I met my wife. For the first time in my life, I'm in this loving, supportive relationship with someone who treats me well and who respects me. And I never experienced that before. I didn't know that was possible. I'm so happy. And what has happened is that now, given their present happiness and the way they're presently being treated, they look back at their childhood and they suddenly this story emerges of, that's the way my parents should have treated me. That's the way my previous relationship should have been. And they insist that life should have been that way, and of course it wasn't, but they keep insisting upon that, and as a result they're stuck in this perception. So there's this constant fight or flight activation. So the trick is then not to have them dig into their past, but the trick is to help them to relate to their thoughts and feelings differently on a moment by moment basis. That's where the freedom lies. Now, there's another twist to this as well. Sometimes you have people who have had very good childhoods and upbringings on balance. And if you would have asked their friends, their friends would have said, well, yeah, he or she was happy. It was a nice, functional family. But now at age 35, at age 20, they were perhaps happy with their childhood and their upbringing, right? But now at age 35, when they look back, it was suddenly traumatic or horrible. Now, it's not traumatic or horrible based upon criteria that most people would agree with. But what sometimes happened is that this person might have suddenly internalized a radical feminist ideology, for example, or they may have become part of this therapy group where they're looking for repressed memories to explain current symptoms. Or they might have internalized some woke identity politics, politically correct, some victim narrative that they're now using as a filter to reconstruct their past through. And they suddenly have all these ideas of how they've been oppressed and how they should have been treated and how the world is. And they're deeply traumatized as a result of that. So, as Richard Bandler used to say, it's never too late to have a happy childhood, but it's never too late to have a miserable childhood either, because you can always reconstruct it very differently, and you can attribute to people the worst of motives, and as a result of that, suddenly have a very traumatic childhood. So, if you work with clients, or if you yourself have the perception of being traumatized, this question of like, well, how long have I been traumatized? And when am I traumatized? And how do I relate to my experience in that particular moment? Or there are golden questions to ask. in my experience, because pragmatically, the only thing you can really do is you can relate to thoughts and feelings differently now. You can communicate more directly now. You can set boundaries now in this particular moment. You can reconstruct your narrative in this moment. You can adjust your expectancies to the people in life, or your expectancies towards life itself. Notions that life should be fair and just and without hassles. So I hope this video was useful to you. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them. If you want to make changes in your life, I see clients from all over the world, online, on Skype. You can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. I also do mentoring and seminars. You can find out about that at the same place, provocativehypnosis.com. Till next time, thanks for listening.